to speak to the cognate debate into the Public Sector Bill and the Integrity and Other Legislation Amendment Bill 2022. And I might start by briefly observing, as others have, about the fact that these two bills are being debated in cognate to avoid proper scrutiny of the Parliament. And that tells Queenslanders everything that they need to know about how this Palaszczuk Labor government view the subject of integrity. This Labor state government closed the book on integrity a long time ago, so much so that it hasn't implemented the recommendations in full made by the Bridgeman or the Cold-Rate reviews. The Premier promised she'd implement all of them, but how many cabinet documents have been released within 30 days since then? The answer? None. This Labor state government haven't implemented the changes yet because they know that if and when they do implement such changes, the flimsy foundation built on deceit, on dodgy deals, on ministerial incompetence and failures of leadership will all come tumbling down. I want to briefly echo the words spoken by the Leader of the Opposition. We must empower our public servants. Queenslanders rely on public servants to deliver the services they need, important services. These employees need to feel supported by ministers and ministerial staff, not intimidated. The government should listen to public servants. They are the ones on the ground hearing from Queenslanders and dealing with Queenslanders every single day. The government would run far more effectively if their employees weren't so scared of them. Instead of focusing on how the state government and, by extension, public servants can better serve the more than 5 million people who call Queensland home, all we hear from those opposite is a refrain blaming an LNP government which at the next election will have exited office nearly 10 years before. Those opposite like to focus on the past because they have no plan for the future. Those opposite like to focus on the past because they need to distract from their failures to deliver for everyday Queenslanders. They need to focus on the past because this third-term Palaszczuk state government is tired, bereft of ideas and led by a Premier who has checked out, Deputy Speaker. As Albo says, Deputy Speaker, governments don't get better in their fourth term, and isn't that the truth? Deputy Speaker, to state the obvious, the Public Sector Bill does not do much to address the current cultural issues running rampant through the Queensland Public Service, because this bill is only acting on the primary recommendation made in the Bridgeman Review from 4 years ago. 4 years ago. The LNP supported stage 1 of these reforms, but a lot more damage and destruction and political interference has happened since then. Perhaps, Deputy Speaker, if all of Mr Bridgeman's recommendations were enacted when they were made 4 years ago, there would have been positive change for employees within Queensland's public service. Instead, like always, the state government took the slow option, dragging it out, hoping the problem would go away, and, Deputy Speaker, it's a familiar playbook. Deputy Speaker, it has taken a full-blown and very public integrity crisis for this tired, third-term Palaszczuk Labor government to act. It's no different to the cynical manner the state government are using the Integrity Amendment Bill to look like they're serious about making changes and restoring integrity. But, Deputy Speaker, it's just that. This entire charade is so that the state government look like they are doing the right thing by Queenslanders, when they really couldn't care less. Queenslanders know, though, Deputy Speaker, they know that this government cares more about how they look than how things really are. Deputy Speaker, Queensland's public sector is made up of hundreds of thousands of hard-working employees who just want to do their job and do it well. I would have thought those opposite would agree with that contention, Deputy Speaker. Unfortunately, Deputy Speaker, as has been said a lot lately, the fish rots from the head. The public service is being hampered by interference from the top down, described in the Cold-Rate Review as, quote, an atmosphere of fear. Ministers are more interested in their political survival than the survival of everyday Queenslanders. We know from the Cold-Rate Review and from first-hand accounts of whistleblowers that many employees across departments are warned to sanitise their advice and recommendations to align with a position which suits political outcomes set by Labor ministers. It's a classic case of government ministers creating an environment to ensure they can claim ignorance, rather than seek advice that allows them to better deliver services that Queenslanders deserve. Ministers seek advice that suit their own selfish political objectives. Deputy Speaker, there are so many integrity failings that have afflicted this Labor state government since 2015 that some are easy to forget. Who can forget the Mango Cube saga, where a foolish minister who should have been sacked but who still sits on ministerial leather because of a Premier who is incapable of enforcing the most basic standards of behaviour, was condemned by the CCC. What about Labor lobbyists working out of William Street during the election campaign?
Member for Logan and member for Glasshouse.
From the Labor government they helped enact. And I hear those opposite saying you weren't even here, excusing the behaviour of a minister who is incompetent, a minister who was described by the chair of the CCC as foolish. Those opposite ignore the problems that afflict Queenslanders every day because they want to play politics with these issues rather than address the substance of the issue. If I was a backbencher on the Labor side, I would be holding my ministers for account for their failings. Ministers like the Minister for Transport and Roads, who is foolish and incompetent, and his failings affect Queenslanders every single day. Deputy Speaker, what about the Jackie Trad debacle? What about the state government cynically changing the electoral system, the entire bedrock of how the Westminster system works here, to benefit themselves with 18 minutes' notice? What about the bullying and the victimisation of the Integrity Commissioner or the State Archivist, both of whom their only offence was to speak out against this government's failings that hurt every single Queenslander every single day? Deputy Speaker, it is a laundry list of failures and abuses of power. But why should Queenslanders even be surprised when that kind of behaviour is in Labor's DNA? Deputy Speaker, I have spoken many times in this parliament about the need for a more effective right to information process. If this government wants to talk about integrity and transparency, then they can start with fixing the mess that exists in the Office of the Information Commissioner. It's stated clear as day in the Coldrake Review that, quote, one of the more frequent concerns raised during consultations has been that of perceived overreach of ministerial staff, end quote. Professor Coldrake goes on to say that, quote, one senior executive captured concern by describing attempts to suppress public records and subvert the RTI process, end quote. There is the problem, Deputy Speaker, in black and white. To name just one example, I submitted an RTI request in April 2021, 19 months ago, and it is still not finalised. My request was for critical information relating to the running of the Sunshine Coast Hospital and Health Service and serious allegations from whistleblowers of bullying from the top down. And it's hit roadblock after roadblock. The public servants came to me because they weren't being supported by their employer. Who was the problem? After waiting 19 months for a result to my RTI, it's clear that the government's current process of delay tactics is now being used to hide crucial information from the public. By keeping these matters secret, Deputy Speaker, it's preventing real change in our health system. We know from the Coldrake Review that records are being deliberately suppressed in an attempt to dodge RTI requests, and that the Information Commissioner's role is influenced by the culture of government, a poor culture of government. The only reason that I can think of for the information not being released in the case I've articulated is that the documents are damning and highlight a culture of bullying and intimidation that is embarrassing for the government from the top down. The delays to my RTI request reek of a cover-up by Queensland Health and the government. Government ministers and their staff must stop interfering in the right to information process by trying to prevent their dirty laundry being aired. Transparency drives accountability, something that this government would clearly benefit from. Deputy Speaker, this particular RTI request of mine is just one example of what is happening across government departments right across Queensland and how it's impacting public services. The Office of the Information Commissioner will be far more effective in helping members of the public and agencies in creating positive change if the Premier and the ministers would just back off and let them do the jobs that they are empowered to do. Deputy Speaker, while I'm on the issue of cover-ups by government ministers, let's talk about data or the lack thereof. The issue that is most obvious and of most concern to the public is in health. Data representing the performance of each Queensland hospital and health service is released months after the fact, which does nothing to inform Queenslanders and it does nothing to improve patient outcomes. Perhaps the Minister for Health needs a reminder that data is not just numbers on a page. Each number represents a patient, a Queenslander in need of help, a Queenslander left waiting in the back of an ambulance at their local emergency department, a Queenslander languishing on a wait list for cataract surgery, or even worse, patients deteriorating on the wait list for a wait list who still haven't even seen a doctor. Deputy Speaker, data matters because Queenslanders' lives matter. And if this government were genuinely committed to openness, transparency and accountability, they would publish data in real time, just as the LNP have committed to. Such an approach will drive change and better outcome for Queenslanders. And let's be clear that that accountability should apply to ministers as well. But health isn't the only department with dramas, and although I've only got limited time left, I will say that it's as if every single minister has ordered their department to make accessing information and data as difficult as possible. Queensland government websites are incredibly difficult to navigate, And this government has demonstrated through its actions that it is not genuinely committed to openness and transparency.